everyone, and welcome to our latest Price Know-How Snippets. With me today, as usual, I've got my MD, Mike Boswell, who's going to talk to us about some of the fundamentals that are affecting feedstock prices. And joining us remotely is our polyolefins product manager, Ian Chisnell, who's going to talk about how those fundamentals have impacted ethylene and propylene feedstock costs and what that's likely to mean to the market for polymers. So we'll start with you, Mike. You could kick us off.
Thanks, Catherine. I think a great starting point is to talk about oil and energy. So crude oil prices actually jumped up quite significantly during the course of June. We saw an increase from about £670 a tonne to an average price of about $715. We saw a lot of volatility in and around oil price, which I think is really being driven by the risk of global recession and the role that oil potentially plays in that in terms of energy costs. So I think we're in a strange situation where oil prices are kind of moving up and down quite a bit. We're back down around about £670 a tonne today. And I think that's going to be the key feature in terms of oil. In terms of gas, I think there's much more fragility in and around energy prices and gas supply, and certainly in mainland Europe for petrochemical assets, gas supply is becoming a real matter of concern given the situation between Russia and Ukraine. I'm now going to hand over to Ian, who's going to talk to us about the latest moves in monomer prices and how they might potentially affect polymer prices. Ian, over to you.
Oh, many thanks, Mike. So monomer prices, monomer prices for both ethylene and propylene sort of dropped quite significantly again from June into July. So ethylene dropped by €100, propylene dropped by €120, taking those prices to $14.95 and $14.80 respectively. I think it's interesting to sort of note Mike's comments about oil price, that it has been quite volatile. And the reason why monomer prices are not tracking so heavily the oil price is due to supply and demand. There is a significant amount of oversupply, both of propylene and ethylene, but particularly propylene. I think I heard a recent report that suggested that Europe was drowning in propylene because there's so much of it available and there's little demand, not just in polypropylene, but in other areas such as propylene oxide and other polymers and other sort of chemicals which use propylene as a building block. I think it's also interesting to note that the contract prices are high, but spot prices, if you take the example of propylene, it's approximately 15 to 30% cheaper than the contract price. And this is sort of being reflected in some of the pricing that we're seeing for polypropylene, that it's dropping quite significantly. So we're seeing prices £300-400 cheaper than they were just a few months ago. And we're heading back to the levels that we saw towards the end of last year. So when we were in that period between the end of the pandemic and before the start of the Ukraine-Russia war, we saw prices drop to quite low levels again, and we're seeing prices get back to those kind of levels in polypropylene. Polyethylene, slightly different, slightly tighter in terms of availability, but a lot of imports starting to arrive into Europe and into the UK from USA and from the Middle East. Some grades slightly tighter than others, so HDPE blow molding, for example, not dropping quite as sharply, but LDPE, locally supplied within Europe, weak demand for it. We're probably going to see at least the monomer, probably slightly more drops in LDPE. Sort of looking further forward towards August, probably see a little bit more of a softening, but at some point very soon we're going to see prices hit a plateau because the supply and demand balance will become balanced. So we'll be in a situation where there'll be enough supply to meet the demand and prices will hit to a level again, perhaps not quite back to the levels that we saw around about the end of the pandemic time, but we should expect to start to see them in the sort of levels of around about 13 to 1,500 euros, depending on the product. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks, Mike. There'll be more information as usual in our main price know-how that comes out around the middle of July. In the meantime, if you've got any questions at all or you'd like any further information, please speak to either Mike, myself or Ian or one of your customer service team. Thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.